And now we have the pleasure of welcoming the head gardener of Tokachi Millennium Forest, Midori Shintani. For the last 10 years, Midori has guided the gardens of the Millennium Forest, merging Japanese horticulture into wild nature. She will share with us how her work is reflective of the naturalistic garden movement in Japan. Welcome, Midori.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. To be honest, this is going to be my first English presentation, and I'm really impressed, by the brave hearts of Amy, Osa, and Dave. Thank you so much for having me here. Today, we have the symposium through the theme ecological gardening, and when I think about it, traditional Japanese spirit comes up to my mind. So pursuing to develop that vernacular is an essential activity for us at the Tokachi Millennium Forest. So today, I would like to introduce the nature of Japan and the traditional and possibly ecological way of living that our ancestors developed at first. And then I will talk about our maintenance works at the Tokachi Millennium Forest inspired by that. I have 140 slides because, they're covering my English, so I'm going to do very quickly, okay? Japan is located in East Asia. The Japanese archipelago stretches north and south, and having many islands and mountains and valleys splitting the land. The climate of Japan mainly belongs to the temperate zone, but it differs from region to region, of course. Like our Hokkaido, it could be reach minus 25 degrees in the winter, but summer maybe could be reached to 35 degrees. So when Hokkaido in northern Japan is still buried in snow, in January or February, cherry blossoms come into full bloom in the South Island of Okinawa. Once the rainy season starts and heat and humidity stay for months during summer, we have a clear seasonal changes. And by ancient Japanese calendars, not only for seasons, we actually have 72 seasons. And the tiny, delicate changes in nature occur around us through the year. So nearly 70% of Japan is covered with mountains, originally by dense forests which are rich biodiversity on its warm and humid climate and the complex topography. As space for living was needed, since that new Stone Age, our ancestors had gone into the steep mountains and cut down small areas of forest to have an agricultural site. This rural landscape with the people's lifestyle called Satoyama. Sato means village, Yama means mountain. You can see that the context, that Sato is a loner area of the mountain and behind the mountain, yes. And the Satoyama has particular zoning areas, a core area, a buffer zone, and a transitional area. And in each developed village, our ancestors set a shrine or a kami, which was believed to protect people living in that village. And the kami is often translated into the god, but I'm not sure if it's correct because the kami is like something similar in the nature that our ancestors believed. And the nature is conserved in a good condition in deep mountain areas. You can see a red gateway in the mountain, so that over that area, people was not used to, not to allowed to get into because it's that a preserved area. And I said I'm not sure because kami translated into the God because the kami has been believed as something similar to nature. So please understand the kami is like something similar to nature. Yeah. And the Satoyama has been developed through the centuries of small-scale agricultural and forestry use. And the young and fallen leaves were gathered from the forest, lower mountain forest behind the village, to use as a fertilizer in rice paddy fields. And you can see the lichens flowering, red lichens flowering around the rice, the field. That's a typical Satoyama's landscape, and the farmers love to plant them and enjoy that, the agricultural site. And those community forest areas were rich in biodiversity and in natural resources. This is a typical landscape of Satoyama, the harvesting and the rices and dry them out in the outside. And the villagers collected wood for cooking and heating. They also collected various food stocks, medicines, housing material from the forest. They never destroyed or developed the forest only for their own benefit. And the succession to dense and dark forest is prevented by villagers that cut down these trees for firewood and charcoal every 20 years. In these and many other ways that Japanese have learned to live in harmony with nature, our ancestors invited the kami from the primitive nature. That's what I understand. And that traditional faith of Japan is animism and the nature worship. And it has been developed and influenced to our culture in every way. For example, on the painting of sliding doors, nature is recalled there. Especially at the traditional Japanese garden, natural landscape is recreated and stylized. And since the Buddhism arrived from China, a Japanese garden have more spiritual purpose as well. So sometimes representing the nature can be like this. This is a silver pavilion in Kyoto. And actually, there is that man is standing behind the tree, wearing a red shirt is down. Yes. We also have another style of a Japanese garden. It's called the stroll garden. It's completely recalling the memory of the time to spending in the wild nature. This is also the Kyoto and the garden in Kyoto called Murin-an. And many Japanese gardens seek that utopia in it by recalling a magnificent nature and a memorable scene created by plants. And yes, this one is a bamboo forest in Kyoto. Yeah. And this Japanese nature worship has been falling apart after energy revolution, about 1960s. And I show you the Satoyama landscape, but Satoyama lifestyle quite changed. And then it is abandoned for more than 20 years. But at the end of the 1980s and the 1990s, there was a lot of activity to try to recover the Satoyama landscape again, because it is our treasure, and it is our very important nature worship, ideal and sustainable, lifestyle, symbolic landscape. So that's why. And then it's very interesting time in the 1990s, and there is a lot of the companies or schools try to recover a lot of natural environment and landscape that we originally have. So that Tokachi Millennium Forest project also has started in that same time. Dan explained a lot of details about the project, but again, Tokachi Millennium Forest established by Mitsushige Hayashi, and he is running the business newspaper business in Tokachi. And he would like to offset the carbon footprint produced by his newspaper business, and that's a project to first purpose. But he bought a forest in 1990, and he started the Tokachi Millennium project at 1992. And then there is a very rich and natural environment at the foot of Hidaga Mountain. So he would like to, make that project developed to share with a lot of people. So like Dan said, originally the forest has been abandoned more than 20 years. So the first floor totally covered by the sasa bamboo. So the first thing that we did is cutting them back and trimming them back, and again. It took about 5 years, but after 5 years, seed banks in the soil, it has an opportunity to germinate. Also, what we worked for the thinning of trees in the forest, and then now we have a lot of wild species in the first floor. This is a Glaucidium palmata, and this is the first floor. We also have a lot of, the wild creatures in the forest, the birds and the insect, a cicada. Cicada is a very symbolic insect in the Millennium Forest, and the frogs. And since we made the garden, a lot of butterflies visited us. Squirrel, and also that we have horses and sheep and goats as the house animals. So we all living in the forest. As Dan explained at the project, we have a very big scale of the project, like 900 acres. So it's master planning. I wasn't there at the time, but the master planning has taken maybe more than 10 years. So this is a machine that I wasn't here, but Dan and Takano-san working together. And they developed that, the theme of our Tokachi Millennium Forest project. It is a Hokkaido garden. And that the garden is in a dynamic scale that matches the northern Hokkaido. The garden merges into the great nature and its ecological system as time passes. And we opened the garden at 2008 with 4 gardens. One of it is a meadow garden. I'm going to talk about this garden later more. And this is an earth garden. And the farm garden has 4 different areas, like kitchen garden, rose garden, goat farm, and the orchard. And then the forest garden. And the forest, we have some different type of forest in the Millennium Forest, actually. And the forest maintenance is very, very important to have inspiration even to maintain the meadow garden. And we could start the forest maintenance maybe in the end of April when the snow melting, and we could find, a lot of native species waking up from the long winter. First thing I always do is just, the checking and the studying of the first floor vegetation, because it never be same. Even a single, 1 year, it's always changing, And so we keep, to studying that native vegetation. There's quite first early spring vegetation, Adonis cordalis. I can't believe that the local people really like to eat cordalis. It is edible, but it's too beautiful to eat. Yeah. So sometimes a local visitor, they come to Millennium Forest, they ask them if they could harvest. It's terrible, yes. And this is the Anemone divilis. They're also very early spring ephemer, one of the spring flowers. And the kautha, again, local Hokkaido people love to eat them as well. And then this is a very tasty mountain vegetable for them, I guess. Yes. We have some different method of forest maintenance. And simply, the first authentic way, we have a lot of inspiration from, that Satoyama landscape I show you. We just cut sasa back and just leave it and keep monitoring the natural vegetation, how they're going to develop or changing. Just leave it and maintain that. But the other thing is we are going to extend the vegetation if we think or find quite, the low potential to have a lot of rich, the vegetation. This is a place we have worked maybe we have keep walking for nearly now 5 years to try to develop Lishikitan, as Asian skunk cabbage vegetation. And we have, like Dan said, we have a grizzly bear also. That's so early spring first work. We always wear in a bear bell in the West. And then because when grizzly bear wake up in the early spring, the first thing they do, they want to eat the flower of Asian skunk cabbage to kind of like a detox their body. And then it's completely the same timing that for human beings come to see the Lishikiton's flowers. So it's quite a dangerous timing. So we have to be very, very careful to work. But still, we would like to do, and so because for visitors, and that's what we do. And then every staff looks really, really happy because we survived, gardeners and the plants and even the bears survive a long, cold, harsh winter. And this is the first thing to do together. So the spring forest work is very delightful and joyful. And even during the summer, we keep, developing or extending. Sometimes we use one part of the forest floor like a nursery. So we naturally try to increase the number of natural native, the species also. And this one is edible petasitis young shoot. We always harvest that. And Matusia also, we always harvest that, and we deliver them to the garden cafe, and the visitor can, eat them. So a lot of people don't know the petasitis is actually the edible plants, but it's very, very tasty. We really like to cook petasitis and the bacon pasta with olive oil. It's really, please, if you grow the petasitis, please try to harvest the young shoot. They're so invasive, so I'm sure you don't need to worry about that. Matusia also. Matusia is very popular to cook like tempura, but at our garden cafe, it's marinated with a sprinkle on the salad. So if you grow them, please try that. I recommend that. So we're harvesting, the mountain vegetable in the forest. And then also, sometimes we need to prune or cut some trees back, and we're gonna use those, the tree materials in our kitchen garden to make support. And in the autumn, we collect the seeds to make plants in a pot also. And then we're going to try to use them when we extend some area of the natural wild vegetation. Also, that sometimes, especially this right one is a Glaucidium palmatus seed. Deer loves this. And we kind of like a competition, very serious competition between gardeners and the deers. And so we have to collect the seeds before they start eating. And then, so we just collect the seeds to help them try to extend their own vegetation around them. So that means directly sowing on the first floor as well. It quite to work well, but it takes about maybe 5 or 6 years to to germinate. Maybe to get the first flower in 10 years, and maybe it's gonna be the big enough plant. Maybe it takes about 25 years. So I made I sow seeds 2008. I mean a Glaucidium palmata, and then last year I eventually planted them back to the first floor. So that means it takes about 9 or 10 years. Yeah. But that's also that we do, our garden team positively to do that. And it takes kind of like to understand the plant time schedule or plants, yes, we would like to think about the time to fit to that plant schedule. So that's very important thing to do. I'm sorry, I'm not good at telling that, but I hope you understand. Yes. And this is a very, very important work in the forest, the cutting the sasa bamboo back. And we gonna lightly gather the fallen leaves and the sasa together and make a compost. And the compost go back to our kitchen garden. So again, you recycling like Satoyama lifestyle. We try to do that here as well. The other day, I experienced to the meadow cutting at Dan's place, and I felt like it's kind of like a similar autumn work to keep the beautiful the natural vegetation. Yes, and this is making a compost from the forest materials. So. Forest maintenance inspired by our ancestors' lifestyle is essential at Millennium Forest. And that activity, I can say that activity to keep the forest beautiful and sometimes develop or encourage a natural vegetation of our forest. This is one of our forests called Entrance Forest. Philodendron and Aluncus flowering together in June, July also. And this is Glaucidium palmata. This size of a plant, as I told you, it takes about 20 years or something like that. We also have Lilium meteoroides, adenophora. Also that Cardioclinum, aconitum, and Primera ezoana, variety ezoana. Ezo means Hokkaido, so Primera ezoana is a Hokkaido native species. Dan told our first meeting, but this is a photograph actually, our first meeting. And we walked together in the forest, and Dan described his vision and explained very, detail about what he tried to do in the meadow garden. And yes, I think I understand because it's quite a similar approach to forest maintenance. Our ancestors' way of to develop, the beautiful secondary forest floor. So this is a meadow garden that I'm going to talk about maintenance again. But I think you feel maybe the connection between the first maintenance and the meadow garden, because we quite get a lot of clues to develop our meadow garden, the maintenance. So this is 2008 when we planted at first. And in Hokkaido, that we have a very short summer growing season, so plants try to get bigger as soon as possible. So in maybe 3 months later, depending on this, and after 3 months later, plant growing like this. And after 3 years, garden like that, look like that, and 5 years. And last year, this one is last year, you can see the trees, eventually start growing and bigger. And who expect to wear the goggle and wearing the snowshoe and do gardening? I definitely didn't. But this is also one part of our gardening work. And I'm sprinkling, the charcoal powder on the snow, because we have a really severe mountain blizzard during winter, and the mountain blizzard coming from the Hidaka mountain just towards to meadow garden, and gather powder snow and pile that. So we're gonna have 2-meter height or the snow piles, and then once the blizzard, the running through, it's just the surface of the snow pile. Just frozen, and then we have a lot of layers of the ice and the snow, and the ice and the snow 2-meter high. So if we wait, the snow melting naturally, maybe we could have the snow around in the middle of May or something, but our garden is going to open at the end of April. So we have to do this for visitors and for ourselves. So it's quite unusual garden work, but we needed to wake our plants up. So we sprinkle the charcoal powder, because charcoal powder is black, so they absorb the sun heat and try to melt the snow. And then the surface going to loosen a little by the powder. And then we going to crush snow by shovel. You can see the sprinkle powder. So we do the sprinkle powder, crush the snow, sprinkle powder, crush the snow again and again. That we usually do this around in the once, and maybe sprinkle the charcoal powder in the February, and again maybe in the March. So twice, yeah. We would look like the mad gardeners. They were grabbing in a shovel and crushing the snow every day. So, yes, absolutely insane, really. And eventually, after melting snow, we are able to split the plants. We are not going to split. We don't split the plants in the autumn because it's too severe winter. So we tried to do that, but it never worked well. So usually we split all plants in early spring. This is the end of May, I guess. Yeah. Yes, in the mainland, the cherry blossom, the full of bloom, but we still, they're working in the snow, so it's totally different, condition. Yes. And 1 month later, Calamagrostis. This is splitting the Calamagrostis carfosta. Look like that. Look like this. Yes. And then we are working in the garden eventually, but first thing that we do is editing the planting mix, I can say. Especially self-seeding plants, because we'd like to keep seed heads as much as possible, because seed has a very good character, and I would love to see. I would love our visitor to enjoy that much, more. So we try to keep a lot of, the seed heads as much as possible. But that means we need to do, editing or thinning self-seed plants. But self-seed plants is very important material because they going to replace the generation. Switch the generation, and they are exactly one part of the future meadow garden. So it's very important and to think how much we're going to reduce, or where we're going to keep them. Or it's very delicate work, but it is always connected to the landscape. So it's a very delicate work. And sometimes we make the plants as well in the pot. And the spring work, we needed to plant a lot of perennials. Sometimes we lost, the plant by the very severe winter. They couldn't survive, or sometimes they just finished their lives. So we often plant a lot of perennials in the early spring. And of course, the previous year, Dan and I had a meeting to how to develop, the planting mix. So this one is a rosacea, bronze beauty, the cultivar. We found that it's at Omori Nursery. You can see that, that brown-red color of the rosacea. And we originally had the green rosacea podophylla, but we wanted to develop and improve the color scheme. So it might be very interesting to have more brownish color. So we replaced that plant. This is what I was planting Polemonium, purple rain. Polemonium is also the native Hokkaido native plant. So it is interesting to down select the plants having a root of a Hokkaido native, but could be more ornamental or good color or tougher sometimes. So that's also very educational thing for visitors to see the meadow garden plants. They know actually what we actually have in the natural, the wild meadow or forest as well. This one also, we were going to improve the vegetation, planting mix like this. So we use a Polemonium like a filler, the plants between Eryngium agavifolium. So taking a balance is the most important work in the meadow garden, I can say. And the marking, I do marking all the time during the season, but because like natural, the vegetation that we have in the forest, the meadow garden, the planting mix, never be same. So every year, constantly changing. So that means we have to do, put our forehand, what kind of the landscape we're going to create. So this work is not for this, that same year. This work is always for, the 3 years later, the landscape. So in 3 years. So we kind of like following the future vision all the time. This means that I'm trying to extend, or I can say encourage, salvias and the Morosa caradonas, the vegetation. So at the end, it's like this. And this one is not increasing the plants. We sometimes reduce the numbers because it's too vigorous. And for example, the Hakonikura macra, I haven't seen the Hakonikura macra growing like this, the before, but they can be weed, in meadow garden. because we have a lot of natural spring water running through the under the ground of a meadow garden, maybe 1.5 meter depth. A lot of natural spring water running through. So that means the plants try to avoid water. So running, they suddenly start having a running route. So our Hagonicola macula having a lot of running routes is totally out of control. So maybe for 3 years or 4 years, we've tried to reduce Hagonicola macula, maybe that first, the 10% less, but 30% less, or 50% less, but still they're growing very vigorously. So now we gave up and let them, they're very peaceful. And so that's also very important to accept that reality and, the plant's toughness. So Dan is very generous for that. And sometimes it could be very hard on plants, like, if you can't do that, you can't, survive this very strict, severe condition of forest together or something like that. But Dan always, let's give one more year to the plant. Yeah. That's our, the conversation. And this one also, we quite positive to have new plants as well, because we would like to introduce new plants and a lot, because there are so many good plants out there. So Meadow Garden has a mission to give our visitors opportunity to meet new plants. So that means we are going to have a lot of new plants every year. At first, maybe we originally have 80 different species, plants in the meadow garden, but now maybe 150 or 160. That means we try to increase the number of, the selection of the plants, maybe at least 5 plants a year. So, and in autumn, we eventually started to growing the bulbs as well, like Camassia. This is a marking for that. And this year, we celebrate the 10th anniversary. It's just the beginning of 1,000 years, but we, anyways, try to celebrate. We needed to encourage ourselves, so anyway. So, but after 10 years, we had to quite big improvement. Taking the balance of a planting mix. And one of them is Cephalalia gigantea. They, maybe you know that they are very freely self-seeding, but we would like to, we'd like a visitor to experience, walking under the big Cephalalia arches with full of seed heads. So, but as a result, we have to do the big improvement again. But it is just once 10 years, so I think it's worthwhile to keep the seed heads. Yesterday, some panels that have the theme about high maintenance and low maintenance. I actually am not sure what we do is high or low, because it's always changing. And also, sometimes we just want to, to make really delightful, the scene, or get really joyful experience with the plants. So sometimes it's worthwhile to do the high maintenance. That's where I think actually, yes, after 10 years experience of a meadow garden maintenance. So this is nothing for us. Yes. And then, our Cephalalia gigantea could reach to the 3 meter height, the very big. So I can't, just put in a stick for the markings, so I just tie them up. So it's naturally like, the marking. And then that is what we're going to reduce. and to take a balance again. And it's very interesting because we have several parts to grow the Cephalaria gigantea, but one part has a lot of seed heads, a lot of self-seeding plants because of the mountain, the wind always and come from the same way, same direction from the mountain to the down area. So Cephalaria, the seeds just, are carried to the area by the wind. So even, we grow the same plant, but condition of it always change, always different in the same garden. So we actually grow the Cephalaria this side as well, but we had to work to reduce the number of Cephalaria only this side. So we dug them up and kind of following Dan's original idea because, the planting mix idea, that's maybe Dan think it's just, the one part of this naturalistic garden and planting mix because the plants going to have own, the competition, also the vegetation, sometimes symbiosis, and then creating, the balance and the rhythm each other. But first vision about, drawing is very, very important because it could be like a map for the gardeners to which direction we're going to or what kind of landscape we should create again. So I think I still now, after 10 years, but I still sometimes see the dance, the original plant, even if we added a lot of, the plant, but it's very important to see. Yes. So we changed the planting again, and yes, a little bit lighter atmosphere, I think so. And another work in the meadow garden is cutting back. As I told you, we try to keep the seed heads as much as possible, or as long as possible, but eventually they're going to fall down, so then we're going to cut them back. Also, this is a kind of interesting cutting back this year we have to do because rosacea now became the very big plant after 10 years. And then they started to disturb the anemone bahensis coming later, the growing. But we don't want to reduce the number of plants, so we lightly pruning, the forage, and then immediately anemone react to having a lot of foliage. Then, so sometimes we take, the balance by the light pruning as well. And also we have an annual meeting with Dan. And sometimes we ask him to come to autumn because we would like to extend the autumn, the interest in meadow garden. And sometimes he come to the early, the summer, and because the planting mix, that planting mix that he needed to see. So it depends on what we should do, and we check the plant combination. I just want to show you the plant combination designed by him. Yes. This is a woodland and woodland glade planting mix. This is a woodland glade. And this is a meadow area. And as I told you, we are very positive to invite new plants to the meadow garden to show the visitors new and give the visitors new experience. So we have a stock beds for that meadow garden, and we experiment a lot of different perennials, very small number, and we see that condition of growth, and then we choose the plant to, and then invite the garden. Yes. This one also, Iris, it wasn't, Iris Derby, it wasn't in the original plan, but we added later. Yes. It's very important to have a seasonal change because as I told you, we have a 72 different, seasonal calendar. That means we are required to, create very delicate seasonal change, even in a perennial planting in the meadow garden. So this is a summer planting, but it's going to be like autumn and like this. It's totally different. And a combination with between the autumn color leaves and autumn flowering and the seed heads, that's our style to show the visitors as autumn interest. And at the end, this is maybe the end of a spring. It started from, the perennials started to preparing for the severe winter coming again. So we going to start cutting back like we do in the forest floor. But before that, we harvested as much as possible, perennials, to arrange flowers, because this is a very last minute to, to be able to touch them in the season. And then eventually we cut all back to the ground. And we do some winter protection, some roses. And eventually a long, long winter is coming again. So since 2008, when I started making the meadow garden, I have always felt my hands is one part of this nature. The naturalistic gardening approach let us see the natural world again and again. The naturalistic garden encouraged me to go out to see the natural flora, and the plants are always waiting for me there. They are giving us a clue to understand the details of the land and showing us how they survive on each condition. And there is always a rhythm and a balance that we can react to the garden. I do believe everyone has experience to touch the nature. The nature evokes a lot of different feelings and the sense of ours. Sometimes we feel sentiment, sometimes surprise, joy, happiness, and sometimes fear. We have a lot of natural disasters in the garden, such as earthquakes, typhoons, and the nature can be collapsed by itself. So we are completely overwhelmed by that. We feel like there is nothing we can do for that. But a plant is always the first thing coming back. So we want part of nature, never give up to make the garden, of course. And the harmonious coexistence between nature and mankind. That is an education from our ancestor. And our mission is following that tradition and developing that to the modern with global eyes. So that naturalistic garden is our transitional place between wilderness and human activities. Wonderful thing about the naturalistic garden is borderless. It never belonged to one specific country culture. Wherever we are on the earth, we create our own naturalistic garden and we can share, even overseas like we do now. I always hope the garden will be a place to recall someone's memory of the nature and maybe evoke your own wild inner. And I find that the potential at the naturalistic garden the most. This is what we do. If you feel like what we do is ecological, maybe it must be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Midori.